Buddhism began in ancient India almost 2,600 years ago. And it was through the endeavors of one human being, namely Gautama the Buddha, that Buddhism came about. It was his great adventure, in fact, to seek enlightenment.
Enlightenment, or nirvana, a state of eternal bliss and perfect peace, is the goal of over 300 million people in the world today that follow Buddhism. Its founder, Siddhartha Gautama, was an ordinary mortal, commonly referred to as the Buddha. Contrary to some belief, the Buddha is not considered a god or a divine being.
Buddha is a title, it is not a name, contrary to what a lot of people think. Buddha is the enlightened one. Siddhartha Gautama was born in northern India, which is now present-day Nepal, into a very wealthy family.
Many wise men attended the ceremony after the birth, and the last one to arrive said, this boy, this child, will either be a world monarch or he will be the greatest teacher ever. So, of course, the king wanted him to be the monarch. So he said, well, what do I do to make sure he's going to be the king and not the spiritual teacher? So the wise man said, well, the only way is to prevent him seeing the world.
And his father then sheltered him from the sights of the world and kept him in different castles, not exposing him to misery. So it was on one occasion that he set forth from the palace to try and discover from himself what constitutes the earth. And there he saw these four sights. One was of an old man, the other was of a sick man. He saw a person who had died, and then he saw a sage, a man, a spiritual person who looked very happy.
And every time he questioned his attendant, asking him, what was that all about? Because it was totally alien, very strange to him.
All of us have to go through these changes, and all of us eventually do become sick, or we eventually die. So he realized that there was suffering in the world and that none of us can ever escape from suffering. He sought the answer in an end to all suffering. How do we end the suffering?
This was the first really important moment in the life of the prince, where he formulated this intention really to devote his life to the welfare of all beings by finding out what causes suffering and then try and find out the solution. So he left the palace and he went into a forest where he met some ascetics who were meditating, and he joined them and he took instruction from them and he started meditating. And that was a period where he practiced extreme asceticism, became very, very thin and nearly died.
He reckoned that he had lived 29 years of extreme comfort and luxury, which had not given him a solution to his problem or his experience of life, that perhaps if he did the exact opposite, experienced extreme discomfort, extreme pain and suffering, that perhaps then he would become content with life.
Unfortunately, he did not find satisfaction in any of the schools, and he gave up asceticism and decided to sit in meditation under a Bodhi tree in order to achieve enlightenment.
Using kusa grass as a mat, the Buddha sat under a peepal tree, known as the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, vowing never to arise until he had found the truth. After many days of meditating at the age of 35, he attained the enlightenment he sought.
And then the prince entered into his final stage of meditation, and he went into what was called Vajra Samadhi, which means the bliss of unshakable confidence, where his mind became so clear and so absolutely stable and firm that nothing could shake it. And in that state of tremendously deep, focused meditation, he cut through the last veils of illusion and realized his true nature, the Buddha nature, which he realized is the true nature of all beings.
The extreme practice of asceticism in a cave left Siddhartha emaciated. accepting an offering of sweet rice from a village girl called Sujatha. He realized that neither self-mortification nor self-indulgence could lead to the truth. Killing himself would be of no help to anyone. A middle path became a clear way to enlightenment for Siddhartha.
When the Buddha first sought enlightenment, he tried some austerities or extremities in order to reach enlightenment. In fact, he subjected his body to great stress by punishing himself and by abstaining from eating as well. Because some people think that by paying penance and subjecting your body to physical stress, you can reach enlightenment. That was one extreme. The other extreme is subjecting yourself to hedonism and extravagant lifestyle. So what the Buddha pursued was a middle path between the two, where you have enough sustenance for your body and where you do not go into one extremity or the other extremity, but you follow a balanced lifestyle, which is today what medical specialists and psychologists also prescribe, a balanced lifestyle.
The middle path is the path away from extremes of overindulgence in the world on the one hand and extreme asceticism on the other. So it's the path that moves away from any form of extremism.
The middle path can be applied throughout life. One doesn't have to go to any extremities. In fact, attaining enlightenment, we call it walking through the path. That's symbolic, walking along the path, walking along the middle path to attain peace and happiness.
The Buddha's own experience led him to believe that the root cause of our delusion in this life is suffering, and this formed the very basis of what is today the Buddhist philosophy.
Buddha, in fact, developed this philosophy or religion, and the basis of the philosophy was the Four Noble Truths. And out of the Four Noble Truths emerged the Noble Eightfold Path.
I think the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path is the most significant teaching of the Buddha.
Firstly, he recognized that there is suffering in the world. That we faced with death, we faced with illness, we grow old.
So the Buddha said there is this inherent problem in the human condition where we never get exactly what we want. So he used the word dukkha, which is a Sanskrit word, which is variously translated, but I think the most popular translation nowadays is unsatisfactoriness. There's an inherent unsatisfactoriness in the human condition.
The second noble truth is that the suffering is caused by desire, always desiring this and desiring that. The mind is never satisfied with anything.
We are incessantly grasping at an idea of how we should be, which is out of line with reality.
Then the third thing is the way out of desire is to curb desire.
The third noble truth, the Buddha encapsulated under the most beautiful Sanskrit word, nirodha. Nirodha, which means everything can finally settle down and cool out. Nirodha is often translated as cessation, this whole turbulent, grasping, frantic way of being cools down.
And the way to cease desire is the fourth noble truth, which is comprised of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is right thoughts, right intentions, right views, right livelihood. We must do everything that is correct, that is ethically correct, that is for the good of everyone.
Then you'll finally free yourself from all this grasping, all this turmoil, all this suffering, and you will then discover your true nature, which is infinite peace, compassion, wisdom, clarity, love, caring for others.
Eventually, as you go through the Noble Eightfold Path, you enter into the meditative state, where through the meditation itself you can develop this perfection.
The Buddha emphasized that the pathway of his experience is only a guide to others. The path should be based on honest self-experience rather than a set of laws or beliefs.
I find that a lot of people who say they believe in God, if questioned, can't tell you exactly what they mean by that. So what I've concluded is that there's a natural need within humans to believe that there is something greater than us, and that somehow it's there looking after us.
See, the concept of God and the concept of the creation and omnipotent, omnipresent being. Right at the beginning, at creation, we were not there. You can say that this is one of the imponderables, something that we never experienced directly. But what Buddhism teaches us is to be pragmatic. Buddhism teaches us self-reliance, to try to achieve the goals through our own efforts and our own willpower, and by following the teachings, which is all based on goodness and purity, which I suppose, if you take the concept of God, is the essence of God itself.
My sense is that the average Buddhist has a feeling that the natural manifestation of the universe is a great force of compassion, that the universe is an expression of compassion, and that we all exist within this huge manifestation of compassion. So if somebody wants to call that God, I would have no problem with that at all. It's just that the Buddha said, don't talk about things that you don't actually know about. Which doesn't mean there isn't a God. It's just that from the Buddha's perspective, we haven't yet been able to establish that this is it. We only go with what we actually directly, tangibly experience. And also remember, the Buddha said, don't believe what I say. So Buddhism doesn't have belief systems. But the essence of Buddhism is kindness, compassion, and living your life so as not to harm others, so as to help them in any way possible, and learn to train and purify your own mind.
Not long after achieving enlightenment, the Buddha moved from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath, where he met up with the 5 ascetics who had been his previous companions. On hearing from him about his experience, they became his first disciples during what came to be called the first turning of the Dharma wheel, or the first teachings of the Buddha. The remaining 45 years of the Buddha's life were spent in India, spreading and expounding on these teachings. Thereafter, Buddhism spread south to Sri Lanka, then north and east of India into the Orient.
Buddhism started to relocate itself soon after the Buddha's death. Sometimes when a religion spreads into different areas, it needs to adapt itself. Now that happens particularly later on when Buddhism moved across the borders, first to Sri Lanka, into Afghanistan, then Tibet in the 7th century, China, and then Japan, of course, Korea, Thailand, and Burma, and Vietnam, and Laos, and so on. And as it came across other territories, the rules and regulations by which the monks lived no longer applied in those areas. And the people felt very often that what happened in India at the time was not very suitable for, say, China. So Zen developed because it had to adapt itself very, very powerfully to local conditions.
Meditation in Hindi means dhyan, which is known as chan in China and Tibet, Zen in Japan.
As Buddhism spread from then northern India to neighboring countries, it adopted the various traditions, one could call it flavors, of the various cultures as it moved through the different countries. And consequently, you had the evolvement of various forms of Buddhism.
Although Buddhism spread throughout Asia, it remained virtually unknown in the West until the mid-1900s. Ironically, the Chinese Communist Revolution that displaced many Buddhist monks and their followers, especially the lamas of Tibet, helped catapult Buddhism into Europe, the Americas, and even Africa.
Without that, I don't think Buddhism would have spread or become as well known and as popular in the West as it has.
The exiled Tibetan leader Tenzin Gyatso, for example, the first Dalai Lama to visit the West, is one of the most famous Buddhist monks in the world, spreading the Buddhist ideals of peace, non-violence and non-hatred, even under the most trying circumstances.
For the beginner who's coming to Buddhism, it could be very confusing because you have so many different forms of Buddhism. You have Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and so forth. But the essence of the teachings is all the same. It's just how you go towards the teachings.
All those various cultures have their own way of interpreting the Buddha's teaching. It's such a rich core of teachings that is capable of being interpreted in so many different ways that to this day still, the greatest Western scholars and philosophers and psychologists are still pulling it apart to see what wisdom lies there. But one thing remains central, and that's the meditation practice. Meditation is the core practice around which everything else takes place.
The path to the ultimate truth was a simple, pragmatic one. It required truthful awareness of the present by focusing the mind within through meditation.
There is a tendency nowadays to turn away from calling it meditation and calling it mindfulness training, because ultimately at the end of the day, it is a matter of teaching oneself to be in the moment, with the moment, for the moment.
Mindfulness is knowing what is happening while it is happening.
The meditation of every form of Buddhist practice is based on mindfulness. Mindfulness is the simple process of training, and anybody can do it, of training the mind to come into the moment and settle down where it is. So it starts with training ourselves to be here and now. When we do that, we immediately discover that the mind is extremely restless. It's like a grasshopper, always wants to jump around. So this we call the unsettled mind. So the first stage of our meditation training is to learn to settle the mind.
Through the hectic lifestyles that people lead, people are continually distracted or encouraged to be distracted, and consequently they are less in tune or in focus with their lives, but they are also less capable of leading their lives because they are not actually aware of things happening as they happen.
Most of the meditation is using what's called a meditation support, where the mind will drift away and we bring it back and rest on the support, which could be following the breath or listening to or hearing sound, for example. So it's very important when you learn to meditate to understand you're not trying to block thoughts. You're not trying to make the mind go blank. You're not trying to empty the mind, because those things are not possible. So we then learn not only to settle and stabilize the mind, but also to develop a very compassionate sense of accepting this inherent movement of the mind, this inherent restlessness. Even more important is learning to develop a compassionate acceptance of ourselves as we are, recognizing that as human beings we are not perfect. So even though I'm meditating in order to change my own mind and benefit myself, I'm doing it so that I can develop the qualities of wisdom, compassion, clarity, which will enable me more effectively to help others.
And meditation has to have a transformative process. If it doesn't have the transformative process, then it's not going to do much for you. You may as well just sit and relax. I remember my teacher says if you just sit and you just go into sort of a blissful state, you know, just sort of half sleep, he said you may as well go and have a sleep because it's not transforming the mind. Because you have to transform the mind to bring about happiness in our daily life. The foundation stone of our practice is meditation, but it's just not meditation sitting on a cushion, because that's only one aspect of it, but taking it into your daily life. I think that's very important.
It's realistically accepting ourselves the way we are. And then as you do that, you learn to come to terms with yourself. And as you come to terms with yourself, the mind settles down more. And as the mind settles down, it begins to stabilize and a clarity develops, which gives rise to what we call insight. Now, insight will reveal increasing depths within our consciousness, which may look like delving, but it's not, because there's a natural process where the depths reveal themselves. It is just very quiet, but extremely sharp, clear observing of what's there. Actually, what happens is awareness is a greater state of being than consciousness. So you realize that consciousness is a limited condition. And as consciousness dissolves, you dissolve into awareness, which is limitless. The focus is on meditation. And if you're going to do meditation, you need to do lots of it. And you need to do it under guidance.
You have to have somebody who guides you along the way, and you have to have a certain trust and respect in that person, because we don't see the bigger picture. This is where our lamas come into it. They can see the bigger picture, and so you have to have a certain amount of trust. But at the same time, you have to experience it. You have to feel that this is correct for you. You know, it's sort of like telling somebody what sugar tastes like and they've never tasted sweet. Very difficult to explain it. They have to experience that.
The teachings of the Sakyamuni Buddha, as Siddhartha became known, have been practiced and preserved through a continuous lineage of lamas and monks, people who have studied, practiced and experienced, then themselves have guided others along the path.
The basic teachings have been very, very meticulously kept pure, and the authentic sources of Buddhism are those in Sanskrit and Pali to this day. So even though the Buddha's original teachings have been translated into Chinese and Japanese and many other languages, scholars always go back to the original Sanskrit or Pali.
The Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, so we haven't got direct contact with him now. So the teachers, they're there to help us now because they have implemented his teachings and have become enlightened beings within our lifetimes. So they can teach us directly the teachings of the Buddha and teach us the meditation techniques. So it's a very important part of the path.
To be on any path or to undertake any discipline, you've got to have a certain amount of effort to put into it. It isn't easy, it's a long process, it takes many years because you're dealing with situations in your life, you're dealing with the environment, having to deal with other people. You know, it's not an easy path. No path, I don't think, and no discipline is easy. You know, you have somebody who wants to play a musical instrument, they've got to practice for many years. Now we're dealing with our mind, and that in itself is quite a challenge.
When you're working on yourself to become more positive, it's important to be gradual about it and know that it's not going to happen overnight, and also to be very kind and gentle with yourself in the process.
It's a process. It's handling little things slowly, not thinking too much, you know, because it becomes too overpowering. But just to say, this is my path and I'm going to slowly, slowly walk along it. Yeah. You can't fly.
The transparency of the original teachings has allowed individuals from any sphere of life to examine and then to find their own place on the path. It is a path where worldly logic remains a tool that can put one on a perch of self-discovery.
Somebody once called Buddhism a DIY religion because what the Buddha did was he progressively and systematically explored the depths of his own consciousness. And he then went beyond the limits of consciousness to what lies beyond, experientially. And through that process, he realized that this is the way to what we call freedom. Then this is why he was so reluctant to teach, because he had this dilemma: how am I going to communicate what I've experienced? And it's also why he was very emphatic and said many times during his life, do not believe anything I say. He said, I'm purely a signpost. What I tell you is simply giving you a guideline how to practice yourself.
One's distance to nirvana depends on where one is on the path, and different places along the way offer different types of meditation to aid one's growth. Understanding grows with experience, which comes from practice.
The most basic meditation practice which anybody can do is breathing, mindfulness of breathing. And then we always start with that. It calms the body down because, you know, people are very tense and there's a lot of stress around today. And a lot of people can't meditate because their mind's chaotic. It's a vortex of stuff going on and they just don't know how to handle it. So there's got to be a lot of relaxation, a lot of awareness of the body. We're not aware of the body, how we're tensing up in a certain area. And even during the day when we're at work on our computers or something, just to stop and just scan the body. Scan the body and think, well, is there tension here? And if it is, just relax it with the breath. And all these little techniques create gaps in your life which you can handle life a little bit more, you know, meaningfully in any case. So the practices we do, a lot of relaxation, a lot of body awareness, and then the breath awareness, which really calms mind down. Because there's very few people who have calm minds.
The pragmatism of the teachings allows for the incorporating of spirituality into daily activities.
Walking meditation really focuses mainly on the sense of touch. It's a case of becoming aware of the sensations underneath your feet, and also how the tendons and the muscles in the rest of your legs move and change. And again, walking is something which most people do on a daily basis. So walking meditation is something they could practice regularly when walking from one office to another, when walking from the car to the supermarket. But people are not aware of it. And that's why when they come here on a weekend retreat, it gives them an opportunity to be introduced to a walking meditation, to do it very specifically, very focusedly, by walking very slowly and focusing continually on the sensation under their feet and in their legs, and ensuring that that is all that they focus on, to not allow any other thoughts to distract them from what they are busy doing. And then ultimately they can carry it over into daily life as well and apply it as they walk from one room to the other, from one place of one building to another, etc.
Awareness of the here and now means that the wavering mind becomes centered. The pains of the past or the fears of the future do not exist anymore. The thoughts of the mind and the actions of the body come into harmony with the gift of the present.
During the tea meditation, one brings various of the other senses into play as well. You slowly carry the whole process of mindfulness more over into daily activities. So drinking tea is something which everybody does on a daily basis. And through becoming aware of the different odors that you smell while making or drinking tea, the taste that is in your mouth, the fact of a different texture in your mouth, you become aware of the different aspects which normally in daily life we just take for granted. Ultimately, the whole idea is that every single activity that you do mindfully. You are fully in the moment, with the moment, for the moment, and only for that moment and for nothing else. Your mind is totally focused on what you are doing. and you do not allow your mind to stray and get engaged in outside activities.
A lot of people maybe get confused if they go into temples and shrines and they see people doing prostrations to the Buddha image, and they think that Buddhism is worshipping the Buddha as a god. But Buddhism doesn't do that. They don't worship the Buddha as a god. They view him as this great example which we want to follow in his footsteps.
In most faiths, the act of prostrating means reverence to a god or higher power. In the Buddhist tradition, it symbolizes reverence to the teachings of those who have already walked the path.
When you do a prostration, you have to let go of your ego. You have to humble yourself. You have to lower your head below everybody else. For most people, that is a very humbling experience.
By bowing, we are respecting the great teachers that have gone before us. We're paying homage to the lessons that they have taught us, and we are disciplining ourselves to follow these teachings and to use it on a practical level.
It is a very useful practice. It does take away a lot of the whole concept of self-importance, of ego, and all of that.
It's an act of humility. It's saying, I don't have all the answers. When I prostrate, I say a series of prayers, or aspirations rather, and in doing that I'm reprogramming my mind from perhaps being proud or arrogant or miserable or feeling I hold the whole world on my shoulders. I'm doing affirmations, if you like. I'm teaching myself new ways of thinking.
We are not worshipping statues as such or prostrating ourselves towards a superior being. What we are worshipping is the truth, the essence of life, the way to discover the truth. And all this is just symbolism. It helps to discipline ourselves.
In Buddhism, the shrines and temples serve a very practical purpose.
A very wise Lama said to me, for Dharma to be taught, you don't have to have a huge center with big Buddhas. The Buddha taught underneath a tree. But on the other side, you've got to think to yourself, well, it's nice to create that space, to create that environment. Personally, I love my shrine. It's a sacred space for me, but you can create that sacred space anywhere. But it is nice to build up that habit energy of going there, and it builds up those causes and conditions again, which we spoke about before, which will lead to transformation. So a sacred space is nice. You know, you feel comfortable in, it could be just a normal chair which you sit on just reading a book, and you can just sit there, reflect, and just pass the time of day. And it could be in the morning, it could be in the evening, just to create an atmosphere where you look forward to and enjoy it. It's important to enjoy your practice. And I love my practice. I think it's fantastic.
The pathway to peace becomes easier to travel along with the right company. In Pali, the language of the Sakyamuni Buddha, Sangha refers to the company of the noble ones who are also on the path. The triple gem in Buddhism is the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
To motivate you, it's important to get people who've got the same ideas as you have, and then you would form maybe a meditation group, and it's always more powerful to meditate in a group situation.
It's a supportive environment where, you know, we say, well, how did things go this week? Could it have been better? You know, what things happened this week which you could have improved upon? And it's only when you sort of reflect on them that you can adjust your behaviour, and hopefully next time when the button's pressed it doesn't sort of create too much discomfort for you.
The Buddha taught that a mind caught up in the hectic pace of life is never centered, focused, or even very useful. In South Africa, many Buddhist retreat centers offer techniques to restore the mind to its brilliance.
Buddhists meet the needs, they meet demands, and there is an increasing demand for people to go on retreat. And there is increasing demand for from people who want to learn to meditate or practice mindfulness.
Retreats play a big role for people who live in the city. They have a very hectic life. So this is why a lot of retreat centers are coming up all over South Africa. So you can take yourself out of that hectic environment and put yourself into an environment that's more tranquil.
Therefore, we offer that facility, and we don't restrict it to Buddhists. A lot of people who come on our retreats are not Buddhists. And, for example, particularly Christians are finding the Buddhist meditation training or the Buddhist mindfulness training tremendously enhances their ability to practice their own religion.
Buddhism doesn't say that you have to convert to Buddhism to get the benefit out of the teachings and out of the practices.
We're not proselytizing, just saying, okay, if you want to come and learn, we're here, you're very welcome, we'll help you along, but at no point will we try and ask you to become a Buddhist. So there is, it comes back to this thing of we really respect other people's religions, and if what we have we can offer to help them deepen their experience and practice of their own religion, we're very happy to do so. The Dalai Lama was famously questioned on this. Somebody said to him, "Which is the best religion?" And his answer was, "Your religion."
The path in Buddhism is renowned for being tangible, logical, and even scientific. Yet closer to the goal, there seems a certain mysticism as well. The Buddha once said, "I teach the path to immortality." What happens when the body dies?
Reincarnation implies that there is something that incarnates, something that incarnates, a soul, a spirit, an Atman, whatever you like to call it. In Buddhism, that is not so. Buddhism looks upon life as a continuous current, a very dynamic current, and that a physical existence, a physical body, may well be attracted to that current of consciousness, but it can fall away as well. So that current, that's ongoing all the time. There's no entity there. There's no thing that you can say, oh, there it is.
It is the central being or the consciousness of the individual, which I suppose one could equate to a form of energy, which is incarnated into another body or incarnated into another existence. And that energy can occupy any other body. It does not have to occupy a fleshy body. It can occupy the body of an animal, or it can also not have any visual form as far as we can perceive.
It's very difficult to explain. If you think maybe the best way to get a little bit of an idea is if you've got dominoes and you have a whole lot of dominoes stacked up. And if you knock one domino down, it knocks the next one and it knocks the next one, and it forms this continuation. But each domino is an individual thing. So if you can think in this lifetime, there's this individual there of that one domino. Then you die, and that domino then knocks over the next one. That domino isn't the same as your next life. It's a different domino. But whatever movement there is, whatever goes through, that energy that goes through, is there with the next domino.
We prefer the word rebirth because it's so clear from the Buddha's teaching that yes, we do engage physical matter again in new bodies, but it's not some body coming back, but a particular strand of consciousness amongst billions of other strands of consciousness that are contained, as it were, into a little stream that has its own somewhat identity, even though it changes all the time. And that tends to dip back again into a physical body. So this idea that we live a very dynamic life in a very dynamic universe is continued even in the understanding that Buddhism has of rebirth.
Intrinsically linked to rebirth is the concept of karma. Of Sanskrit origin, karma literally means action. the quality of our actions determines our future states.
The Buddha said it's the most difficult part of any teaching to understand. But very basically, karma means causation. So it means everything we experience, good, bad, neutral, is the result of something we have said or done in the past. And everything we think or do or say now is shaping our future.
Although our present state is the result of past actions, Buddhists believe that this can be improved through our present acts, especially if guided by noble, compassionate thoughts.
Any unwholesome thought, unwholesome words or actions that you do will have a result. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You will ultimately experience something where you will say, but why is this happening to me now?
To quote the most obvious example, if you plant a cabbage seed, you get a cabbage. You don't get an oak tree. And everything else falls into that line.
You can think of it as this pure essence, which is always there within you, but this pure essence is surrounded by your karma. And this karma is what pushes you to your next rebirth. So there's no individual I that's moving through.
Karma is not carved in stone, so to speak, to the extent that it cannot be changed. One can certainly influence karma. Any wholesome action that is being done will be accumulating merit, and that can offset unwholesome actions that one has done in the past. And that is why it is so important to try and do charity work, to try and benefit others.
The Buddha's quest began with finding an end to suffering, and today Buddhists engage in service programs to ease the suffering outside and so end the suffering they experience inside.
In terms of Nanhua Temple, that is to a large extent practiced in terms of outreach programs.
We're involved in quite a lot of outreach. Here, this particular meditation center is doing a lot of work with a community of about 200 very disadvantaged people who many of them don't even have places to live. So we've got training programs going for woodwork, sewing, we've got a little preschool going. And then in Johannesburg we have quite a big feeding program going.
It comes to clothing as well. We have a collection depot for old clothes to give to the poor and the indigent. We've got a group of very dedicated people who do volunteer services there.
Although the core teachings of the Buddha remain pure, its inherent openness has allowed Buddhism to adopt and adapt to different cultural practices.
Well, the interesting things about Buddhism is the way it integrates into cultures, because the Buddha's teaching is totally practical and very pragmatic. So it's adaptable to any culture. And now that it's come to the West, it's very much adapting to Western cultures.
The Buddha certainly was quite clear that what you can expect in life is uncertainty, insecurity, things change, things are unpredictable.
From the outset, the Buddha said, look, human beings are very different, and therefore there must be different ways for different beings. And that is why he gave all these different ways of doing it.
Consequently, it is also felt that ultimately there will be African Buddhism. Various aspects of the African tradition, African culture will eventually be incorporated into Buddhism.
The practice of Buddhism means taking decisions and exercising choice in everyday life according to the values experienced.
Based on the Buddha's philosophy and way of life, we try to emulate the principles in our own life. For instance, when it comes to say, driving a car, I myself, although I would have preferred not to have a car, but there's no choice for me, so I'm driving a hybrid at the moment to save on polluting the atmosphere as far as possible. We have got a deep love cultivated for the earth, which all stems from the philosophies that we have undergone.
With empathy for the environment, a Sangha from Durban works closely with the local dump site, transforming waste into wonderful spaces of restored natural beauty, while simultaneously generating electricity in a world-recognized project of waste management.
I think once you, especially Buddhism, it talks about the interdependence of everything. So we're not an isolated unit. You know, you and I are interdependent. We're interdependent upon trees, plants, the atmosphere, the world. And I think once you get into a philosophy, you understand that a little bit more. And you think, well, like I was talking about, the practice isn't only for myself, it's for what you can do for the environment as well.
Meditation leads to the experience of compassion and empathy with every sentient being, and a sensitivity to each and everything.
The essence of our religion is compassion, reverence for all life, be it in whatever form, because we have to have this empathy for all human life and also animal life and insect life as well. Compassion is what we all strive for, being at one, at unity.
About 2,500 years ago, a mere mortal set in motion a teaching that promised an end to all suffering. He pioneered a path to reach this space of perfect peace. A path that was open to all of the world's people. A path neither too easy or out of reach. Not a path of extremes, but a middle path of self-respect, self-reliance and self-experience. A pathway to peace through the self within.
We should all strive to be happy too, because Buddha said that his message was to try and spread happiness amongst all the people. So that was his exhortation to his monk. He said, go forth and spread the message, spread peace and spread happiness, because that is your mission and that is your goal.